Let's look at the continuous integration and continuous delivery process with Docker. And it starts with your application source code, which is typically available in a repository, and that's what you clone to your, let's say, a workstation. And that's how you get your access to the source code. And this is when you will edit and things like that. And what you typically do for a CI/CD with Docker is first you Dockerize your application. What that means is you build an image out of your application, and that image is the Docker image. Now, how do you automate this process? How do you build this image is where you can create something called as a Docker file, a step-by-step instruction, a declarative code, which then can be fed into the Docker build process. And that's how you automate creation of the image. So Docker file is a way to automate the image build process. Now let's say you have built an image for your application. What next? Next is you'll have to take that image and test it, maybe in a local development environment. You may have to launch your application there and do a maybe test run. Now, your application may be, let's say, a web front end, and it may need a database service in the backend and so on. So when you test it, you'll have to launch it as a stack with application and database backend and have that connected and so on. To automate that process, launching of the application stack is where Docker Compose comes in. So Docker Compose helps you automate and interconnect these services and so on. Let's say that's where you run your tests, maybe functional tests, or you may automate the process of running the tests as well. Once you're done with that, you take that image, let's say your image has been tested with the Ariel container, then you take it and push it to a registry. A registry, just like GitHub, is a repository. It stores the image. Think of it as an image repository. So all your images can be distributed using registries. And this is part of the continuous integration process, and this can be repeated. Now, once you have published your artifact, your image is in the artifact, and once you publish it to the registry ways to distribute it, you can have a configuration which actually triggers the deployment also. This is part of the continuous deployment or a delivery process. So where you may have some manifest, some YAML code, let's say in a Kubernetes environment, and you then apply the manifest, which will pull the image and then launch the container with it. And it will not only launch a container, it will also help you load balance it, help you scale it, help you replicate it, and so on. And this is a Kubernetes cluster, and you may have a bunch of nodes running as a pool of servers where you launch your containers. So this is part of the continuous deployment process, and we are talking about container-based delivery. So every time you make a change now, the process repeats. So every time you make a change, you rebuild an image, a new image that is, publish it here to the registry, let's say with version 2. Before you publish it, you may want to test it locally. Once you have done that, you can trigger a new deployment on the Kubernetes side. That is also called as a container orchestration engine. So based on whether you are doing a continuous deployment or whether you are continuous delivery, you may just trigger a deployment to a staging environment or a production environment, or you may have a process of manually approving the process of releasing the actual image to the production environment if you're deploying there, right? So that process can follow. So this is an example of a continuous integration and a continuous delivery with containers.